So, now the floor is open. We are open for all your thoughts and questions and comments. Anything is welcome. Almost.
I have no answers for this issue.
Hello, thank you very much for two very interesting and fascinating presentations. My name is Helle Ploug Hansen. I'm a professor in humanistic rehabilitation research here at this place. I'm a nurse and anthropologist. I have a question for you, John. As I understood you, you were talking very fascinating about a despiritualization of people's experiences. And in that relation, you were talking about the children, and that the preschool spiritual experience they have were despiritualized when they came into the institutions. I would like to ask you if it's possible for you to give us one or two small examples of what could this spiritual experiences be, just to have to visualize what it means.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, the way that David Hay, I can tell you because from this piece of research, what he did was he worked with a photographer to create a series of images that related to particular experiences of awesomeness, of wonder, of beauty, of creativity. So he had quite an open understanding. And then he got the children to offer their interpretation of these things. And through interpreting their interpretation of these visual images, he began to see and build up a picture or a description of the way that they would encounter it in the world. And then from that, he developed his theory of relational consciousness. So he developed quite an elaborate methodology specifically focused on that. But that's how he did it.
Just go ahead, there is all the... We have good time. We were quite disciplined, I think. We weren't.
Yes.
We deserve some kind of order. Thoughts. But we need the microphone because it's being recorded. Just a moment. We need to have the microphone over. And the microphone will come from behind. Mm-hmm.
Does it work?
It does.
A very interesting presentation, both of you. Thank you. I'd just like to hear, probably for both of you, when did you started to pay attention yourself to this issue? Has it been since you were a child, or just throughout your education, or the last few years, or when did it all start?
Shall I begin? Then you can begin.
Eureka moment, or?
Sure. I was raised in a family where spirituality was part of the family. So for me it was natural, but I had a period where I just didn't care for it because it was the stuff of my parents. And it had a lot of other interests of windsurfing and whatnot. But I think in high school something came up, a search for meaning that brought me onto this track of theology, and that's. But I always was between medicine and theology as two roads that I could have chosen. Everything that both of them had to do with people. And then I had written my thesis on prophecy, which is a lot about humans' experiences of some kind of divine presence and a God who's active in history, and that brought me onto spirituality and health, and I would say the rest is history through a very generous stipend from Lundbeck, which enabled me to come into this field. So I'm very grateful for that, and that really, I don't think I would have discovered it without it. So I went to the US and we delved into it with colleagues there, and now I'm here, which is good. It was a position here at STU for an ethnographer, you remember, Helle? And I was asked to apply for it. And really I had to say, I'm sorry, but I don't yet know so much about ethnography. That's not my field, but I have something new that I think is really interesting. And I think it was a bit of a miracle, but they decided for me in the end. So, and then it just grew with a lot of openness from direction. Now it's you.
Yeah, well, most of my early life I worked as a nurse. So I worked in mental health for 16 years as a nurse. And then I worked as a community mental health chaplain for a number of years. So most of my early formative professional years were kind of spent with people who see the world a little bit differently. And if you're hanging around people that see the world a little bit differently, you become different yourself. And then I went into, in the early 90s, I suppose it must have been, I moved from nursing into theology. And when I began to think about theological things in the light of my nursing and chaplaincy experience, I began to see that actually the whole issue of spirituality and the whole issue of religion were actually much more fundamental than I had perhaps noticed when I was embedded in the midst of my nursing career. And so my interest in spiritual care is autobiographical. Mm-hmm. It's because of where I've come from that I am able to think that through now in a theological context and begin to see what that looks like. So that's where it comes from. How it's developed has been complicated and interesting. But the one thing I have to say is that Aberdeen University have been very helpful in the sense that they've let me do whatever I want. So as long as it works, right, they're happy. That's the key. And so that's been really helpful because we've been able to experiment and explore a lot of different areas. But in terms of where the interest came from, that's where it comes from.
Do you think you're able to re-spiritualize your institutions in David Hume's own homeland?
You can repeat the question.
Well, the question was, do you think it's possible to re-spiritualize institutions in David Hume's homeland? Probably not. However, it is possible. Well, I'm saying probably not. I think it's very difficult to shift a whole institution, but it's not difficult to begin to model something differently. And I think that's where change comes, when people begin to see things differently, then they begin to make significant changes. And just thinking about my spiritual past, he said, I looked a bit ashamed there, but I didn't mean to. My father was a pastor, and so I was brought up in the church, and it was terrible. Oh, it was terrible. Well, you know, you go to church on a Sunday, and you talk to your friends. Then you go back home, and you get into trouble for talking to your friends, and it's just an ordeal. Right. And they say that pastors' children and policemen's children are the worst, and I think I was probably amongst the worst in a lot of different ways. And so, but the only reason I ended up interested in religion was because one night I was out having a wild night in Aberdeen with a bunch of guys, and then 4 weeks later I met the same guys, and they'd all become Christians. And I kind of looked at them, and I was thinking back, that night, and that was a turning point in my life because I kind of saw something happening in them, so I thought, well, maybe I should rethink what I'm doing. And I think it's the same thing for institutions. Like, the turning point comes when you see people doing something and think, well, maybe there's something different.
So my name is Bess. I'm a former PhD student by Niels Christian. And I have a question because within hospitals, when you try to seek out the values of the patients, they might not have the same language as a chaplain. So the content of this spiritual care, could it be non-religious? Or do we need to develop an existential/spiritual language to approach people having a slightly different background than you might represent?
I can just begin and you can take on as a chaplain. So in my professorship in Germany, and certainly also here in Denmark, for me spiritual care is not just talking about religious questions and is there a life after death and so on. That may be for some patients, but it is very much a question of an attitude. In German we have this wonderful word which we really can't translate. It's Wahrnehmung. Wahrnehmung. It is to take the truth of the patient in the relationship and to not be just me and my perspective, but take really a very phenomenological way of trying to take the truth of the patient, to bring it closer to me. And I think that's what spiritual care is first and foremost. It's being with the patient. And then have opening questions that will lead us into the world of the patient, that particular patient which we're in front of. you've worked also as a
No, I
chaplain.
agree with that. I mean, in the United Kingdom, and it may be the same here, you have people who are second and third, maybe fourth generation non-Christians. So the kind of religious narrative, it just isn't part of the family culture. So therefore, even if you wanted to articulate things religiously, it wouldn't actually make any difference. And so I think there is, whilst spiritual carers take, to some extent, a new language to people and help them to articulate things and give them a fresh set of concepts, sometimes a fresh set of narratives, there's also a real sense in which the spiritual carer needs to learn a new language. Because, right, so you go to a course, you understand spiritual care, then you go to talk to somebody, and they're using language that doesn't resonate at all with what you've been taught, but clearly is deeply meaningful for them. So the question is, how do you learn that now? So I suppose that the spiritual care needs to be bilingual, at least two languages, the language that they're trained and formed in, the language of their spiritual education, and then the third one would be trilingual, the language as it's interpreted and worked out in the practice of being with people. So it's highly complicated because the basic needs that spiritual care seek to meet, everybody articulates them. It's just whether you can understand that and then how you respond to it.
Again, one at the very far other. Otherwise, you can say the question and I'll repeat it.
Yes, I can try that.
Yeah.
I was thinking because spiritual care in an oncological department is easy to kind of visualize how that would be. But I was thinking about how do you imagine spiritual care in a psychiatric department where someone, for example, has religious experiences that would be interpreted as psychosis.
So I'm sure you could hear it, but I'll just repeat it anyway. So spiritual care in a cancer context is quite clear because cancer is so frightful and we're used to seeing it there. But in a psychiatric ward, it may be very different where so many patients seem to experience religious delusions. And it's quite true that there have been different trials that gauge the spirituality of the healthcare worker or the physician. And the most religious physicians will be the general practitioner. And then there's a drop down to the oncologist and so on. And the psychiatrist who speaks with the patients that are the most religious will be all the way down at the bottom, just above the radiologist for some reason. So there's a real religiosity gap, as it's been called in the literature, between psychiatrists and psychiatric patients. And that's very true. And that's one of the things you have worked a lot. John gave a presentation this morning just for our smaller network, dealing with exactly how to abort this. Maybe you want to follow up.
Well, yeah. I was reading a really interesting article in the New York Times recently. And I think it was called Medicating a Prophet. And it was a psychiatrist who was talking about her experience, or one of her experiences, in the emergency room in a hospital in New York, where this gentleman who had what psychiatrists would call delusions began to articulate that he was a prophet, that he had been come to save the world, and that he had a special message for this emergency room. Now, she was faced with a bit of a dilemma because she thought to herself, what do I do with this? Do I medicate or do I just leave him as he is? Now, following on from that initial conversation, he lifted up his shirt and he showed that he had the kind of marks of the sarcoma that indicated that he had full-blown AIDS. Now, if she medicated this gentleman, then his delusions may have been taken away, but what would he be left with? He'd be a homeless man dying of AIDS. And so she was left with this dilemma as to whether to medicate, which means take away his symptoms, or leave him, which means at least he has something to give himself self-esteem and to build a positive sense of identity. In the end, she medicated, but she held on to the question as to what the best thing to do there is. So that seems to me a very interesting example of spiritual care, simply by asking that question. practical instrumental thing is obvious. Let's get rid of the delusion. But actually, by listening beyond that, and beginning to think more creatively about what the implications of taking away these delusions might be, opens up space for the possibility of other types of intervention, or at least other ways of looking. So the key would be don't discard the question as nothing, the situation as nothing but symptoms.
Should we take one last question? We want to end about 4 o'clock. I'm sure you all need a little glass now and something to eat. But if there is a last question, it's most welcome. All right, I think René has one to end up with. Maybe we can use the microphone for this.
Yeah, thank you. René Hefti from Switzerland, a medical doctor and lecturer at university. I have 2 questions, one to you, Niels, and one to you, John. The one to you, John, is you spoke of spirituality, you spoke of de-spiritualizing, but you didn't spoke so much of, is there also a danger in re-spiritualizing? If you look back to history, if you look back to Enlightenment, there was some reason to separate these spheres. So, in what way do we have to reflect on this today in spiritual care? Mm-hmm. And the question to you, Niels, you spoke about the mountains, the beautiful mountains. I don't know where they are in Denmark, these beautiful mountains.
We have the Himmelbjerg. It's 147 meters, so we're very proud of that one.
And the question to you is, this is, now you achieved this professorship for spiritual care, and you showed this development here in the country. But what, to your opinion, would be the next step to go in this field?
Mm-hmm. Want to begin? I remember.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's wise caution there. And I think one of the issues, because spirituality is so diverse in its manifestation and conceptualization, that re-spiritualizing in itself is kind of an open concept. It could mean all sorts of things. Does it mean bringing religion back in? Does it mean enforcing healthcare professionals to always be looking at particular things? In other words, does it mean, or put slightly differently, does it mean bringing in competencies that everybody has to adhere to? In which case you do have an issue, because what would these competencies look like? Would they necessarily be releasing, or would they be oppressive? And so before long you have a whole system within which things become difficult. Or does spirituality really have to do with formation? Has it to do with the way in which we educate people, the way we form people into bringing them into particular shapes and forms that enable them to see things that are spiritual? But again, you have the danger that whatever shape and form people are educated into becomes difficult or dangerous. So I don't think by any sense that the idea of re-spiritualizing is inevitably a good thing. And what I would say is that much more work needs to be done into the negative dimensions of spirituality across the board, alongside of thinking about how we can reintroduce or help people to see certain things. So I think we just need to balance that understanding a little bit more fully.
Mm. And I would reply to your question, where to go on from now. So that before this professorship, my field was really within faith and health quite broadly. And I don't think it's a coincidence that now it's a professorship of spiritual care. So we're really, really trying to take the research of the past many years, both the Danish but also the Nordic and European and worldwide research, into something that will benefit the patient. We see three ways, I think. One would be to continue to do some research about the needs of patients, because there is a lot we don't know. And second, we are trying to design these intervention studies that I already spoke about, so continued learning courses, communication tools that will open this field more, enable a conversation about these questions. And third, also interventions, and because this is the good of the patient through the optimization of the care that's been provided. But I think we can also try to do, like we had Dallon, Rehabilitating Center Dallon, where we had patient courses, cancer rehabilitation courses. And we are now going to test an intervention, such a patient rehabilitation course, focusing on well-being and existential issues, spirituality, nature, art, and so on. So that's another way we're trying to directly target some interventions that may benefit patients. So I think that's the future here and now. Thanks. Relations, yeah. And Elizabeth is very big also in relations.
Could you repeat number 2 again, please?
The number 2 is to try to educate healthcare providers to learn more of what is spiritual care and how to provide spiritual care in a very broad sense. Because as we saw in my presentation, there's so much insecurity in this field, both in patients and in healthcare professionals. And we feel it's a taboo. It might even be a stigma, who knows? That could be interesting to investigate. So I think there is a lot of work to be done, but there are a lot of opportunities. All right, we need to start closing. I have some thanks I wanted to give. So, well, where can I begin? A good place, I think, is my dear wife, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for being who you are, with all your love and faithfulness. I think you are one of the most true persons that I know, and a very worthy person, I think. Actually, I had planned this, John, in Danish. Maybe I can continue in Danish. Joseph will translate for you, I'm sure. Så virkelig en meget, meget sand person, synes jeg, er meget, meget værdig. Og så er der jo rigtig mange mennesker, der har spurgt mig, hvordan er det at være gift med en så intelligent kvinde? Og det tror jeg, der findes rigtig mange svar på. Men jeg synes, det er rigtig godt. Og dernæst Josef og Peter, de dejligste drenge i verden. Det må jo lige nyde lidt. Og også nogle værre beryler. Men som man siger på fransk, on les veut comme ça. Det er præcis sådan, vi gerne vil have den. Så bare bliv ved med det. Jeg ved godt, at I nogle gange synes, at mor og far bruger lidt meget tid på arbejdet. Og jeg har også ofte sagt, for pokker, kan I ikke få et arbejde, hvor I tjener lidt flere penge? Men I ved også, at det er fordi, vi virkelig synes, det er vigtigt, og at vi brænder for det. Og det siger vi tak til jer for jeres forståelse for. Sådan lidt bredere familie, ikke mindst mine kære forældre, som sidder her i dag, og som jeg har glædet mig sådan også over, er her. Tak fordi I altid har troet på mig. Jeg ved ikke, at det lyder som en kliché, men der er sådan noget om det. Og tak fordi I er dem, I er for os. Og min kære søster, som er nok måske er så den næstmest intelligente kvinde, jeg kender. Så jeg er så glad for, at du har taget hele vejen fra Belgien. Og det er virkelig dejligt, og også hele din familie. Og så er der jo rigtig mange venner, som jeg bare er så glad for. Rigtig mange venner, der er kommet langvejs fra. Tusind tak for jer. Rigtig mange kære kollegaer. Jeg vil sige, Jens, du er godt nok en af de mest nysgerrige og fordomsfri personer, som jeg overhovedet kender. Og i dit tilfælde, der synes jeg, det er i den grad med til at skabe et forskningsmiljø, som er nysgerrigt, interdisciplinært, er sjovt, et sted, man har lyst til at gå på arbejde, og et sted, hvor man har lyst til at arbejde sammen med ens kollegaer. Og det synes jeg, du har en enorm evne til at skabe og vedligeholde som forskningsleder. Og også dig, Jesper. Det var dig, der var den første, jeg mødte på SDU til en ansættelsessamtale sammen med Mogens, som også er her i dag. I troede også på det her felt, hvilket var lidt af et mirakel, når man tænker på, hvad jeg kom fra, som en, der havde forsket i og interesseret sig for mirakler. Jeg synes, det var meget modigt i første ende, men jeg har troet på det, og jeg tror også, vi synes, at det er vokset rigtig godt og har udviklet sig godt. Også tak til... jeg vil også sige, at Jesper har jo altid haft det her meget klare fokus på public health og på rehabilitering, og ser hele det her felt som en del af den pakke. Og så Ole, tak for din støtte og for dit mod også til at gå ind i det her. Det er jeg også super glad for. Meget, meget fint, så jeg synes, de må gøre det på. Og alle mine kære kollegaer fra FEA, jeg synes, I er de bedste kollegaer i verden, og vi vil ønske, at vi får masser af god tid i fremover. Det glæder jeg mig også rigtig meget til. Så er der Mogens, som jeg allerede nævnte. fantastisk visionær dekan, som vi har haft også i dig, Mogens. Man må sige, du har virkelig været en af dem, der har drevet den personcentrerede medicin fremad på meget tidligt stadie, hvor folk ikke rigtig vidste, hvad var det, han havde gang i ham der, Mogens Hørder. Men det har vist sig, at du har haft fat i den lange ende. Så også stor tak til dig. Til Kaja, til Helle Plov og alle mine gamle HMS-kollegaer, kollegaer og samarbejdspartnere fra UH, andre kliniske miljøer, Andor Tvisler med flere fra REPA, fra Helle Skovrup fra Løgum Kloster, Jette Amtorp fra Sygehus Lillebælt, alle de samarbejder, vi har. Og så vil jeg sende en særlig tak til Torben Palshoff, som desværre ikke er iblandt os mere. Han er jo gået bort, døde af nyrekræft, levede helt utrolig lang tid med sin lidelse, meget værdigt også. Og han var virkelig en af de der, hvad kan man sige, sådan lidt hanelefant-agtige, fantastisk menneske, som bare virkelig troede på det her felt og så en aktie i det, og så, at det var vigtigt for Danmark, og har været med til at bringe det fremad. Og også Fred Ole, som vi har nævnt, den tidligere formand for Kræftens Bekæmpelse, der har været en kæmpe støtte. Og så vil jeg rigtig sende en speciel tak til alle mine nuværende og tidligere Ph.D.-studerende. Mange af jer er nu allerede i gang eller på vej som postdokker, hvilket jeg synes er skønt. Og I er virkelig blevet min nærmeste forskningsgruppe og mine nærme venner. Og så alle de samarbejdspartnere, jeg måtte have glemt, eller som jeg skal tænke på, hvis nogen af jer ikke er blevet nævnt, så må I vide, at I er mine tanker og mit hjerte. Og så selvfølgelig også de fonde, der har gjort forskningen mulig. Jeg vil ikke nævne andre end dem, jeg allerede har nævnt. Lundbæk især. Kræftens Bekæmpelse også, som har givet mereudgiften fra lektorat til professorat i en 5-årig periode. Og ellers alle dem, der har gjort det her arbejde muligt. Og tusind tak igen til jer, fordi I er kommet hele vejen. Det er skønt at se jer. Nu skal vi have lidt at drikke. Tak for nu.